And look what it says in verse 11 about this particular scenario. It says, for this is a heinous crime. What a great word. You know, it's not a word that we use a lot, except those of us from the 80s. You know, we would find adultery to be most heinous, okay? But, you know, nowadays we probably don't use the word heinous that much, and the Bible doesn't really use it that much. But it's such a great word here. I mean, this is a heinous crime. Yea, it is an iniquity to be punished by the judges. Now, here's one thing I want to point out, is that what's interesting here is that in the beginning, when he talked about thinking on a maid, when he's talking about being tempted to cheat on his wife with a maid, you know what he's talking about? He's talking about how God is going to punish him. He's saying, God's going to reward me if I'm pure. God's going to punish me if I'm wrong. And I'm terrified of God's punishment on that type of sin. But what's interesting here is that he actually brings up civil justice. Because here's the thing about committing adultery with another man's wife, is that throughout history in the ancient world, you know, this is illegal pretty much everywhere. And even today in the United States of America, this is still illegal in some places. And I know that if you're in the military, this could be considered illegal. If you're in the military, you could get court-martialed or dishonorable discharge. And dishonorable discharge is tantamount to a felony. And so the idea here is that, you know what, if I'm going to be out there as a single man committing fornication, you know what, God's going to judge. God's going to punish. If a single man is out there committing fornication, God's going to judge. God's going to punish. If a married man is out there cheating on his wife and, you know, thinking on a maid and going after some young unmarried chick or whatever, God's going to punish him. God's going to pour out justice and vengeance on him. And that ought to be terrifying. And to Job, it was terrifying. But here's the thing. If you commit adultery with another man's wife in ancient Israel, and pretty much ancient everywhere else too, ancient Babylon, ancient Greece, whatever, you know, if you did that, you're also committing a crime that is punishable by the judges. Right? So, you know, he's worried about God over here with verse number 1. Now he's worried about even the judges getting involved. Okay? And obviously, God is also there as well to punish. But here's the thing. This could be one of those situations where God doesn't even necessarily have to get involved. Because again, if you commit adultery with another man's wife and you're being put to death, well then, you know what? There's your punishment. You know, God's up in heaven again just watching it happen. You getting what you deserve for committing adultery with another man's wife.